Well, last year was a very unusual year for influenza, and actually one that physicians across the nation were bracing for. We're like, oh, how are we going to fight this battle on two fronts, fighting both influenza that we know hits and ramps up every winter and COVID at the same time. But thankfully, we were wrong. It was a very mild year for influenza, and if you look at the graph, the numbers of cases in South Dakota for influenza was practically flat, where the year before we had a record peak. So that was a huge improvement from previously. Why that happened? There are a couple of things that we think went on. It definitely wasn't for lack of testing. We did tons of influenza testing, and we can test and know the difference between COVID and influenza. Now, if you look on someone drinking a can of pop, you can't tell the difference between Coke and Pepsi by looking at it. COVID and influenza have very similar symptoms, but lab tests can tell the difference specifically. Just like if you taste a can of Pepsi versus a can of Coke, you know the difference as soon as you take a sip. They are different viruses, those are different pops. The lab can tell the difference between the two. So we know that it wasn't mistaking one for the other. But we do know that there was a lot fewer cases, a lot fewer deaths, and a lot of it I think has to do with what we were doing. We were wearing masks, we were washing our hands, we were wiping down and cleaning surfaces more than we had ever done before. So all of these things together have given us a lot of protection against influenza. And the other thing we can do is get our flu shot. Last year was one of the highest years for influenza vaccinations ever, and we can keep doing that. That's our best way to protect against serious illness, hospitalization, and death. The good news is we can also give your COVID vaccine and your influenza at the same time, which is wonderful. So they don't have to be separated. Initially, we were saying we should, out of an abundance of caution. Now recommendations are they can be given together. So the other thing we're working on is if you need to be tested, we can test for both influenza and COVID with the exact same swab. So we only have to swab your nose once. It's the front of the nose swab. It's not the one that goes all the way back and tickles the brain. So it's a wonderful way to test for both so you can tell, are you drinking Coke or are you drinking Pepsi? Do you have COVID? Do you have influenza? So we will know which one is which, and we can get you on the right medication that's appropriate for you.